Today, I want to talk about strength training for Hyrox. Specifically, is it important and how exactly should you be doing it? So, first of all, I just want to clarify that today, when I'm talking about strength training, I'm not talking about maximal strength, like a powerlifting kind of thing. I'm just talking about lifting weights in general for the purpose of building muscle endurance, and getting stronger. So for most people that are training for Hyrox, this is probably not the most important aspect of your training. In fact, it's probably one of the less important aspects, specifically if you're someone that doesn't come from a running background. The reason I say this is that Hyrox is primarily a running-based sport with some strength obstacles in between. But again, these strength obstacles are pretty endurance and muscle endurance base. So, you know, doing a ton of hypertrophy and pure strength work isn't necessarily going to be the most beneficial thing. With that being said, though, there are certainly benefits to strength training for your Hyrox race. It just might not be the most important thing. So it's absolutely something not to be neglected, and it should have a place in your training routine. It's just a question of what that place is. So I want to start off by going through some adjustments that I've made coming from more of a strength and hypertrophy background as I've started training more and more for Hyrox and shaping my training around performing well in Hyrox. So number one thing is I now do much lower volume in terms of my strength training. Uh, for the most part, this is less exercises. And one of the main reasons for this is it just gives me more time and energy for building my cardio capacity, both in terms of running and doing cardio cross training on the ergs, that kind of thing, and working circuits into my training. Um, so as far as where that reduction in volume is training, a lot of it is actually coming from upper body. The main reason for this is that the upper body is just not as critical to Hyrox performance as lower body is. So, a lot of my leg strength training has stayed similar, probably a little reduced, but similar to what it was. Whereas upper body volume has been pretty significantly reduced. So, as an example, um, you know, I probably used to be doing somewhere in the order of 30 to 40 weekly sets for, the big upper body muscle groups, let's say. So, let's say pull or push as a whole, I'd be doing 30 to 40 sets versus now I'm more around 16, which is quite a big reduction. But as the research says, still more than enough to be uh, maintaining the strength levels that are already built up. Another key point of how I'm working this into my training is when I'm building out what a typical week looks like in my training plan, I'm starting by scheduling my quality run and circuit sessions into the training week, and then I will build around that to work in the strength training sessions. One of the main reasons for this is I'm looking at if I will be fully recovered from those strength training sessions in order to do my quality runs and circuits. So for example, if I have a really hard leg day, I'm going to look at what I've got scheduled in terms of circuits and hard runs, and then schedule it somewhere where I know I'm not going to be limited on those runs and on the circuits by, having just destroyed my legs the day before. I'll usually try and make sure I have a little more recovery time in between. As far as what I'm doing specifically with the exercises here and different variables you can manipulate, one of the things I've been looking at is a little bit lower rest time, especially on again upper body movements here, things that aren't overly systemically fatiguing. So lower rest times there and supersets as well. And there's a couple big benefits to that. Number one is it's time efficient. So again, that goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's going to leave you with more time to be spending working on your circuit training, your cardio, your running, all that. And then number two, if you're doing these lower rest time supersets, it's going to challenge your cardio as well. So you get some benefits there. But of course, we certainly want to be reasonable in the way that we do this. Uh, you know, I wouldn't recommend that you start supersetting squats and deadlifts. But if you're doing some upper body work, for example, I find that rather than doing a push day and a pull day, it works much better just to do one upper body day. And then it works great for supersetting, for example, biceps and triceps. It's quite fun. You get a great pump and you're able to push your cardio a little bit at the same time. Another adjustment I've made, this one's a little bit more mental than anything else, but I've sort of accepted the fact that it's not always critical to be progressing my strength training. Sometimes just maintaining strength levels is okay, and that's all that needs to be done. And again, as I've talked about before, this is something that can be uh, tied into your training periodization. So, maybe especially as you're coming up to a Hyrox race, your focus is just you want to maintain your strength levels and build your cardio fitness. And then maybe in an off season period, you have a training block where you're putting a little more focus on building some strength, building some muscle, and improving that way. Um, last couple of points here as far as adjustments that I've made. Something I've been looking at a good bit is, uh, if I can do my cardio and weights in separate sessions, the quality of both is usually going to be a little better. Now, of course, that's not always possible, but the way I'll typically do that is I'll go out and I'll run in the morning, and then I'll lift in the afternoon or evening. But even then, I'll still do some cardio typically at the end of the lifting session, which brings me to my last point here. So when possible, I will still generally go with doing cardio after the weights. And the main reason for that is that I feel, uh, you know, I'll be more compromised in terms of my strength training if I do that after cardio versus if I do my cardio after strength training. Um, my performance is down slightly on the cardio, but not as much as if I do it the other way around. Uh, and then one little caveat on top of that, if you're doing your cardio training after your strength training, I generally try and avoid, doing a form of cardio that involves a muscle group that I just absolutely torched with strength training. So, for an example of that, I'm typically not trying to get on the rower right after doing a big back and biceps workout, or running after doing a big leg workout with squats, that kind of thing. Um, you know, as a better example, you could definitely do your run after a pull day, and then you could do the row or the ski after your leg day. Um, I want to move into a few points on exercise selection for when you're training for Hyrox. So the number one thing that I've noticed is that deadlifts aren't necessarily the most compatible with Hyrox training. To me, one of the biggest limiting factors here is that it's just incredibly taxing on the lower back and the nervous system, and it's gonna limit your running and your circuit training for the next couple of days if you're really pushing the deadlifts hard. Um, which makes it tougher to get the total amount of weekly volume that you want to get in. So what I've done to work around this is I'll typically switch out a conventional deadlift or sumo deadlift for an RDL as I get closer to a race. So for about 8 weeks or so, that final training block before a race, typically just doing RDLs instead. That way I still get some kind of hip hinge movement, which is absolutely beneficial for Hyrox, right? When you think about it, there are multiple hip hinges that we're doing in the race. The sled pull, for example, and the row are both hip hinge movements. So it is a movement pattern that we want to be training. And then what I will do instead is when I'm in a little bit more of an off season, like I am right now, where I'm still a few months away from a Hyrox race, uh, I'll work some deadlifts in that way. I absolutely love doing them, so it's not something that I want to fully remove from my training program, and I find that tends to work quite well for me. In terms of squats and Bulgarian split squats, again, these are pretty taxing movements, and they are certainly beneficial for Hyrox. I mean, if you look at the movement pattern, it's very similar to a lot of what we're doing in Hyrox, but it's not quite as specific as just doing walking lunges. So this is, again, similar to the deadlifts where um, when I'm in season, a few weeks away in that final 8 week training block, I will typically put lunges in. And then if I really want to do some Bulgarians, I will put those in more of an off-season training block. And then as far as squats go, I do like to still keep those in, but there's a little bit less volume when I'm in season, so not pushing quite as close to failure and typically doing a little bit less sets. Finally, one last point on exercise selection here. I would strongly recommend that you always include some kind of vertical press. So, you can think of a standing barbell shoulder press, uh, dumbbell press, something like that. Even an Arnold press, machine press, machine shoulder presses. These are all great, and I think this is just an easy lever to pull here. You know, the strength carryover to the wall balls is going to be pretty good, and it's not going to be incredibly taxing to be doing some shoulder press, to be doing shoulder presses compared to some of these other heavier movements like squats and deadlifts. I want to talk a little bit about uh, doing Hyrox specific movements. So, sled push, sled pull, lunges, all that in your training. And what I'm talking about here is outside of circuits. So number one point here is that doing these movements when you're fresh or somewhat fresh is absolutely not the same as doing it in the race. If you think about lunges, for example, when you're 7 kilometers and 6 stations deep already as you're getting into the lunges, uh, you're feeling pretty gassed. It's not the same as at the start of your training session in the gym. You throw the sandbag on your back and do a few lunges. It's a very different feeling. So there's a couple different ways to sort of work around this limitation if you're going to be doing these Hyrox movements not as part of a circuit. One of the big ones I like to go with is, I'll use some heavier weight or put an emphasis on going faster. So, since I'm mostly training for open, what I'll do pretty often is if I'm doing station work that's not part of a circuit, I'll just go ahead and use the pro weight. Or another great option here is if I'm doing a strength training and cardio combined session where I'm doing zone 2 cardio after the strength training, I'll do almost all my strength training, and then I'll do my cardio. And then whatever station specific work that I want to do, I'll do it right after the zone 2 cardio. That way there's already at least some fatigue built up. Um, and then there's also, there's different techniques to build up some fatigue. A lot of these involve shorter rest periods. So, a couple that I like to work into my training are the EMOM. So every minute on the minute, I've been doing uh, a lot of work like that recently where I'll do, maybe 5 rounds of, uh, you know, roughly, let's say 45 seconds of work. I'll generally do it based on reps, but it tends to work out to about 45 seconds. And then, that leaves me with about 15 seconds rest. And then I'm going again and doing 5 total rounds of that. There's the Tabata style too, which is, you know, typically 20 seconds all out, 10 seconds rest. Similar idea. There's lots of great ways to do this. But one of the main things here is that you're, significantly manipulating the rest variable of your training compared to what you would be doing during your normal strength training work. And limiting that rest is going to, allow fatigue to build up and get you at least somewhat closer to the feeling that you'll be having on race day. With all that being said, strength training is, for most people, it tends to be a lot of fun, and it's of course really good for you. Building muscle, getting strong. As far as overall health goes, that's awesome. So if you enjoy doing it, then absolutely keep doing it, and double down on it as much as you want. There's no hard rule here that says you can't strength train for Hyrox. In fact, you absolutely should be. It's just a question of getting the right balance between strength training and cardio. If you're looking for help getting a program that builds that balance between strength training, cardio, and compromise running circuits, you can check out my app, Hybrid Strength Fitness. It's linked in the description. It'll build a workout program for you to help you train for Hyrox and get you your best results yet.